that is, I don't know what I did with it apparently. Probably I hid it from myself, and I think I'm just gonna have to get over it and use something else. Oh, Lee, I ended up getting one of those carts and the toppers, and I got this other drawer thing from Michael's, getting all organized.
Oh, I know. I just love those carts.
They're so nice. I'll hold it up. I got one of these, the little drawers. So now in each drawer, I'll have like one watercolor drawer, one gouache drawer, one acrylic, one oil, and they're all in a tower basically. But I like this size because you can kind of have them laid out, and see all your colors without having to dig. So I got that at Michael's too. It was about $30, I want to say.
Does that fit in the cart, or is it something just separate?
It's separate, and there's, let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 drawers.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm having it like kind of my paint tower.
Oh, that looks good.
Yeah, it's fun to get organized. I like being organized. It's nice when you're like, oh, I want this thing, and you know where it is.
Yes.
Amazing how that works, huh?
Right? I know. It's amazing. So here's my photo. And is anyone else working on their painting like this today?
I am.
You are? Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
And of my landscape.
Yeah, feel free to work on anything you want, of course, during studio hour. It doesn't, whatever you're feeling.
I'm actually starting over.
Are you?
Yep.
Sometimes that's not a bad idea. Sometimes you learn something from the first attempt, and you know how you want to start it the next time. So
yeah,
I like that. I never really got art teachers that were like, no, you cannot start over. Like, there's a time to start over and a time to push through, for sure. But
yes.
So please, if anyone has any questions or anything, let me know. I'll probably mention a couple things that I'm sort of doing, but I might not necessarily talk through the whole thing, but whatever questions you have. But basically what I'm going to start doing now is I've let this dry. I haven't touched it since Saturday, actually, or Sunday. I have Saturday classes now on my mind. So I'm going to just kind of start darkening things and adding some more details. And
Jennifer?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got these two, the tree and the cookie from yesterday.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't know what to do with the cookie, but I think I'll just watch what you're doing on your. I've done some more work on my tree.
Have you? Yeah. Your cookie, the cookie too, kind of thinking back to that from you showing us. Sometimes what I like to do, like if I'm like, oh, is this enough? Should I add more? What I try to do is maybe add some smaller lines and smaller details on top of some of the bigger ones. Sometimes that adds just a little bit more, makes it look a little bit more finished.
Okay, well, I ate the cookies.
Well, you can make it up too,
Can you take a look at my tree and tell me what?
Sure. Do you want to hold it up?
Sure.
I can spotlight you for a minute.
Ooh,
yeah, that's really pretty.
Yeah, I've done a lot of stuff on that. I've done crayon and water, everything.
I like your style. I like that you do a little mixed media and put that on there. I think that makes that interesting.
Well, can I do anything with that today, just using either crayon or colored pencil?
I mean, you could if you want to. Okay, take a look at like the ground. Look at your grass, perhaps. or sort of the foreground, one thing you could maybe do is take some of the materials that you have and add some more texture, making it look a little bit more detailed in the foreground, and then it'll look like it's pushing back in space. Because right, that's how we see things when we're looking out at a scene. The things closest to us are in more detail, and the things further away start to soften and less detail. So maybe some little mark making or some texture, or, you know, whatever you're feeling, but that might be sort of interesting.
I think I'll just watch what you do today, because that's where I get stuck. I mean, I don't know how to go forward from there. So I think I'll just watch you.
For sure. I mean, and that's kind of what I'm starting to do now, is starting to darken the tree, and, you know, everything is dry now too. So it's going to build up really nicely. And it is totally, you know, I talk about this all the time, but I just, you know, repeating myself just in case, you know, you weren't here last time I said it, or you're newer. But I think that, you know, when you're using a reference photo too, it can simply be a starting point. You can change it as much as you want to and make it your own again. That's why we're making art. It is one thing to look at something and reproduce it exactly, make a copy, but, you know, we also have photography and copy machines. So this is an opportunity too for you to play around and be creative, and, you know, feel free to change things, use your imagination, change colors, play with texture. I think all that stuff is really good. But usually what I start doing on top of, when I get sort of a loose kind of layer over everything, a wash over everything, that's when I like to start to define things a little bit more. So maybe in certain areas I'm going to darken, in other areas, of course, we're doing watercolor, so we don't so much lighten with watercolor. We work from light to dark. But, you know, just kind of push colors, push texture, maybe play around with some different paint brushes. I say this a lot too, and then never listen to my own advice. I mean, that's not true, I do, but sometimes I'll just get stuck in a rhythm of using the same brush and I'll forget to switch it. But switching paint brushes can be really nice, just different brush strokes layered. The more you layer, the more depth you're going to create, basically. One layered, or a single layer of paint tends to look a little bit flatter than multiple layers, and that's simply because you just don't have enough time to put in as much value, especially when we're looking at something like a landscape that is really dense and has a lot of information there. And I say this a lot too, but remember, you can also just not draw some things or paint some things. If there's things you don't want to include, just like you can change things, you can just omit things too. Really what I should do is I haven't painted in my fence at all, so before I get too crazy with these trees, I am going to pop in a little bit in that fence. And I'm just using some black and sort of watering it down. Again, I tend to not get too caught up in the color of a photograph that I'm referencing personally, just because to me, I'm not necessarily trying to create an exact replica. I'm just using it more for composition and just sort of basic value, whether it's light, whether it's dark. But as always, the beauty of art is there's so many choices that you can make and so many different ways to do things that by practicing, you're just going to, I would say, kind of like add to your bag of tricks. And then when you're painting, you'll say, oh, like that technique or style would look really good here. So just know that that's going to come with practice. I think as long as the passion is there and you enjoy creating, you're naturally going to get better. It's like impossible not to. It just happens. And I I just sort of, I look for the dark areas. When I'm looking at something, I'm just kind of trying to break it down into basically lines, shapes, and then values. So I ask myself, is it light? Is it dark? Again, I'm not super concerned with matching color in this particular instance, but I like to pay attention to value because that's going to help inform the viewer of where it's light, or sorry, where the light source is coming from. Add in some of these little fence posts that weren't there initially. And again, watercolor, because it's so fluid, can be very soft and washy, and sometimes, you know, it does look very beautiful in a single layer. It's not that it can't work in a single layer, it absolutely can. It's just hard to capture as much depth in a single layer. So again, I'm just sort of popping around and looking at where some of these shadows fall. Again, I'm not trying to create exact replica, so I'm just sort of popping in these values. And here I said I wasn't, I won't talk too much today, and here I go. Again, the biggest thing to keep in mind with all paint, not just watercolor, but all paint, is just paying attention to, is it wet on wet where it's going to blend together, or do you need to let an area dry before you can continue so you can actually build that layer up? So keep in mind those two different things. And with watercolor, again, one of the fun things about it is that you can create those really beautiful wet on wet effects. The biggest things just with painting in general is you're really, you're constantly problem solving, like, ooh, how do I interpret this texture, or what sort of line or shape or stroke could I do here to sort of recreate this. And I think a lot of that is just playing around. You're just going to discover things. I say this all the time too, but you'll figure out what you want to repeat and what you don't want to repeat. Some people work faster than others. I mean, for some people, they can sit down and, power through a painting in that time. And, if it's a painting I've done once before and then was sort of recreating it to teach it, that'd be one thing. I'd go through it faster. But, every time you're painting, you're figuring something else out. It's a new experience. Like I said, you'll add to your bag of tricks and you'll repeat things, but then there'll be things that are totally new that you haven't quite done before. Usually, like, if you add a little bit more water in your brush, you can get little fine lines. Just bring out some of those trees. Again, when coming up with ideas for painting, so I've been thinking about that kind of a lot too, because typically, like, if I'm doing a painting just for me, let's say not teaching or demonstrating, but just doing a painting of my own, that's just, me making art. not talking through it, not recording it, just me making art. I typically will compile multiple, so I'll come up with sort of an idea, maybe do a sketch, and let's say, I don't know, let's say there's an elephant in this painting. You know, okay, I kind of know what an elephant looks like, but I'll probably look at some reference photos just to help, you know, really get the pose, really get the details that I'm not able to imagine. But then I also compile it with things from my imagination. So, you know, when you're looking at photos, again, repeat myself again a little bit here, but you can decide how much of that photo you want to take. It is fun to merge images together. It's fun to do things from imagination. It's fun to reference photos you've taken. It's fun to just sometimes find photos online, because sometimes when you're not so attached to this specific scene or imagery, I don't know, sometimes that can make it easier for some people. So and you can certainly do a combination of those things. You don't have to stick to one.
Jennifer,
Yeah.
are you changing brushes now, or did you get those little bitty branches from the same brush?
I'm still using the same brush.
Okay, so
And again, how I do the little branches is lots of little water and really just using the tip of the brush.
okay, more water.
More water, yeah. And I could have switched to a smaller brush for sure. You know, I think it's, again, one of those things, what your comfort level is.
Yeah, no, I think that's neat. I just didn't know how you did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Just kind of popping in a few little dark lines. This one got a little blendy on me, so I'm just gonna turn it into some of these. Should pay attention to my background a little bit a minute. Again, you know, when you're thinking about things in the back, so just kind of keep in mind that as things go back in space, we see less detail, less information about it. So maybe you're just kind of letting things blur a little bit. Maybe we're adding more water. Again, it's not that we have to make it look identical to the photo. We can just take the information we want, the essence of it, if you will, or the spirit of it. It doesn't have to be all of it. And sometimes it's fun to just pop in other colors that you don't necessarily see, or try different kind of brush strokes or lines. And again, the technique of glazing is where you apply a wash of color over top of a color that's already dry. So it's a nice way to slightly tint something or add a little bit more depth by pushing some of these matte colors, making them a little bit cooler and darker. Just kind of push it back a little bit. And then, of course, as we keep going back in space, things actually, you almost imagine them mixed with white. So they'll lose saturation as they go back in space. Yeah, I find it really helpful to just let your watercolor dry for a little bit. I think that's why I like working on paintings kind of over time, not in one session. But sometimes I'll do little studies in a session, like in an hour, but most of my paintings will take longer than that. Just popping in a little bit of dark, kind of going down just a little bit. Some of this will be covered up a little bit more, but I just kind of want to see a little bit of the dark in the background. Remember, the ability to transform something and abstract it or stylize it is a skill just as much as making something look very realistic. There are people who make very realistic art that have a hard time, doing some of those things. So however you like to make art is awesome. If you haven't spent much time, I think any art that you're interested in, I think it's just good to look at art, just see what's out there. But I mean, even just go to Google Images and type in watercolor landscape and look at the wide variety. Recommend this too, but taking pictures of your process is also really eye-opening. A little bit. Sometimes I'll get a little impatient and I gotta watch the wet on wet. I mean, really, if you're gonna have one watercolor brush, you'd want like a round, like I'm using right now. It is really versatile in the fact that you can do kind of large areas with it on its edge, but then you can do kind of little fine details with its tip. Like for tree bark, I'll just sort of look at the shapes. Trying to ignore
Jennifer, could I do acrylic on this watercolor that has everything on it already?
Sure. Acrylic will sit on pretty much anything.
I only have 3 colors of acrylic right now.
What colors do you have?
I think white and gold and kind of it's a blue. It's not blue. It's like blue with white mixed in. I can't think of the name. Turquoise.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, acrylic will pretty much sit, like I said, on anything. Once you have acrylic on it, then it'll be hard to put watercolor on top of that.
Okay. Well, this is all just learning.
Absolutely. And I love mixed media. I know Ivan's not here today, but Ivan does a lot of mixed media stuff. No, Susan, you like mixed media, right? I mean,
yeah, I'll do layers of things.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for what else does this need.
Yeah. I think that's, you know, thinking that way is very open-minded about not limiting yourself to like one certain thing. So yeah, experiment. You'll discover cool stuff. I mean, we could have a day too, if anyone's up for it, where you guys share tips and things that you do in your own art making. It could be like little mini lessons or something.
Yeah, I'm always thinking, what would happen if I did this? What would happen if I did that? Ooh, that's cool. You know?
Yes, I love that. Yeah, that's great. So typically too, in like watercolor, you can just go over the areas where they're darker to just intensify the dark areas, and then if you leave the other areas with just the wash underneath, that's one way you can start to create some of the highlights and the shadows. And again, just paying attention. Do you need to let that area dry before you can continue, or is it good to go? We could do a little mixed media class too. That could be fun. Do some experiments. Definitely want to push these branches out there darker. That'll push them back in space a little bit. They're still pretty light.
So those white spaces in the background are just white that you left there from the original page?
Yes, so this is masking fluid. So
Oh,
I'll peel that off and then,
okay.
yeah. Kind of some of those little buildings in the background I thought were kind of interesting, but didn't necessarily want to, you know, include all of them or in that exact way. So yeah, when you're painting watercolor, I think with all these layers, it can be a fairly time-consuming process. So it just depends what you're doing. And I like the idea of like colored pencil on top of watercolor. I mean, watercolor pencils, of course, work too, but even just like actual straight colored pencil can be really cool. Add some more darks in here. Push some of this back a little bit. And fan brushes can work well for trees too, but I kind of like just tapping them in. find too that usually my last strokes of a painting, or as I'm wrapping it up, usually there's smaller little things. Again, I tend to work sort of big, looser shapes to then sort of smaller details. And of course, because I did use some Frisket, some of the last that I will do will be taking that off and kind of playing with those areas a little bit and seeing what I want to do. The other thing you can do is find taking colors directly from the tube if you are using tube watercolors. You could also do pan watercolors with a little less water, but usually taking it straight from the tube and adding a little bit less water sometimes is nice for popping in like some of the finer details because the paint's a little bit thicker. Stick out just a little bit, sort of a way to differentiate just a bit. So I did switch to a little brush now.
I'm sorry, say that again, that last thing.
I did switch to a small brush now.
Just before that. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Talk about the tube watercolors.
Somewhere right in there, yeah.
Yeah, so I mentioned that you can put some fresh watercolor on your palette straight from the tube if you're using tubes, and just use it with a little less water.
Okay.
And it'll just help you kind of differentiate the texture a little bit if you want to. Gonna do the same thing, kind of pop just a few things out back here. I'm just gonna pull a few fresh colors, kind of like a mauve color. Some taupe. And some peach. Colors into the background to kind of suggest some of those buildings back there. It's very subtle, it's very hard to pick up on the screen very well. Probably layer a few more colors, but this is a nice sort of base. and darks right now. Yeah, I mean, you can really take like a painting as far as you want it to go. You know, another kind of fun thing to do, like I could let this all dry and I could take like, I don't have the pen sitting over by me right now, but like a waterproof black ink pen, like Micron, can be really fun to just give it a little bit of like a pen and ink feel. Again, things that are, you know, sort of have black outlines tend to look a little bit more stylized. But, you know, sometimes that looks great. Again, it just depends what you are going for. Again, I'm just looking around all these trees and just kind of squinting at them a little bit and just looking at the sort of shadowed areas in the back that are just kind of helping push it back. I'm just kind of darkening those areas right now. Need to get rid of some of this masking fluid, I think, too. I want to bring that tree out a little bit more and obviously can't because masking fluid is blocking me. Again, when you squint and just kind of try to look at the shadows to the best of your ability, and you can sort of paint in the little shapes that you see loosely in the areas that you see them in. Again, it's just how far you want to take it. You know, sometimes it's hard to know if you're finished with something. We talked about that before in classes, that one, I think the more you make art, the better you're going to get at knowing. For me, I don't know, it's usually just kind of like this feeling that it looks complete, or I'm over it, or I feel like I'm starting to ruin it. To be honest, it's like I could probably just like keep going on this and kind of adding all these little things, which is kind of how I am when I paint. But I could also take the tape off and kind of call it done too. Of course, I do want to let everything dry before I remove any masking fluid. So all these little shapes, again, hard masking fluid that I will sort of fill in with some color or leave a little bit white, but probably add a little bit of shading. Like this ground is kind of loose and there's lots of just bigger washes. I could put some like little sort of lines and details on top. That might be a way to look that, have that look a little bit more polished. Also, I sort of just try to look for the shadows. Just do like washes of black. I could put a little blue in there actually, but again, I wasn't focused too much on matching my color. I feel like I'm close. I feel like I want to let a little bit more dry before I wrap it up, but I am close. I'm going to, just because I'm far enough along, I'm going to go ahead and remove the tape. And I just like to use I use delicate surface. It's good for the watercolor paper. Oops, I did get a teensy tiny tear there. Sometimes taking the tape off, even like if you're not quite done, but just have like a little bit of detailing left. I don't know. Some people like to wait till they're fully done, but taking the tape off also changes the perspective of it a little bit because you're not seeing that like rough edge around everything. So it just kind of, I don't know, gives you another little perspective. The other thing I think that's really helpful, like before deciding your finish, is letting everything dry and holding it back, looking at it from a distance. All those things can be really helpful. Of course, I don't dare take off any of this masking fluid because stuff is still kind of damp on this paper. So I'm going to wait to remove masking fluid. But I think what I'm going to do in these open spots is just kind of pop in some more color, but it'll be a little bit brighter because it's pure white underneath.
How do you get that stuff, that masking fluid off?
How do you get it off?
Uh-huh.
If you just take your finger and lightly start going over top of it, it'll gently peel up. It's kind of like a rubbery material. But again, you don't want to do that while anything's wet. I totally let everything dry before I attempt to remove it. So, yeah, I don't know. I may add a little pen and ink. I haven't fully decided yet, but I feel like after the masking fluid comes off and I pop in a few more details, probably add just a little bit more to make it feel finished, but it's close.
It's pretty.
Yes, nice.
Well, thank you. Again, I think it's, again, I'm very repetitive. I know it's just the teacher in me, but I think allowing yourself to experience the material you're working in is really good too, right? Watercolor is very soft. It is fluid. So, not everything has to be so crisp. It can be very soft if that's what you want. So, well, let's see. I'm going to turn down our music and do that.